Stryd community, thank you for joining me today. My name is Angus, and I'm live streaming here from the Stryd headquarters in Boulder, Colorado. Over the last year, I've had the pleasure of bringing you some really fantastic race results and discussing how I improved, how my training went, how I used Stryd to deliver those fantastic racing results. And now today, I'm going to be talking about the other side of the coin. I'm going to be talking about some suboptimal racing results and some strategies I took to analyze the Stryd data and learning how I can improve for my race next time. So to start off here, I'm going to give a little background on how did we get here, those fantastic race results I was talking about, and then my recent race result, which did not go so well. So I ran my first marathon at Grandma's Marathon in Duluth back 1 year ago in June 2024. I finished in a time of 2 hours and 57 minutes and established this kind of baseline marathon power of 392 watts. And then later that year, I ran the California International Marathon, CIM, where I improved my time by a substantial margin, went from 257 down to 244, and up my marathon power to 409 watts. So now with 6 more months of training, I set my sights high again here, aiming to both drop that time and increase that power once again. And my goal for this race that I ran just a week ago, I set a power target of roughly 430 watts and a time goal in the 230s range. So let's see how that was stacking up here against those other race results. So I was looking to drop that time into that 230 range. I went from the 250 range down to the 240 range, looking to get to that 230 range next, and was looking to increase my power by roughly 20 watts. And we can see here I've listed my halfway splits here. So halfway through my race 1 week ago, I was coming across the half mile mark, the half marathon mark at 1 hour and 18 minutes and power of 429 watts there. So that was right on target there. I was looking to run around 430 watts. I was looking to finish in that 230s range. So halfway through the race, it was going really well. But as you know, I mentioned this is a suboptimal race result. So you can probably guess what happened in the second half of the race. Things did not go so well. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at how that second half of the race went. And we can see that visually represented here with that white line being the separator of both my power and pace from the first half of the race being on the left side, and then the power and the pace from the second half of the race being on the right side there. And we can also see my finishing time. It didn't shake out to that 2 hour and 30-minute mark. It shook out more to that over 3 hour mark, and my power substantially dropped during the second half of the race. So compared to my previous races where the power is nice and flat, nice even pacing, we can see the power was not so even there and not so perfect. So the big question is, what happened? What happened throughout the race that kind of caused this suboptimal race results? During that first half of the race, I was checking the power often. The race was going well. During that kind of the middle section of the race, I could feel the fatigue setting in, but my metrics were decreasing every mile. I was checking the watch. I could see my power was slowly dropping. My pace was dropping on a mile by mile basis. I still felt like I was working hard. And then as I kind of approached that 2 hour mark for that those last 8 or 9 miles of the race, I could no longer increase my effort. I couldn't get the metrics up, and I was just looking to finish. So the big question is, what went wrong? And the challenge for a lot of marathon runners is often they're left with a lot of questions, but very few answers. They don't have the data points. They don't have the insight on what caused their performance to not go the way that they thought it was going to go, or um, or basically what caused them to fall short. The great thing is, if you're running with Stryd, we do have those answers. We have lots of different data points, of course, not just on race day explaining how the race execution went poorly, but also we have all the data points leading up to race day. Every easy run, every long run, every workout, we can dive into that and get those answers in order to adjust and get ready for next time. So I'm going to be taking you my process of analyzing my race data and my training data leading up to race day and some of the takeaways I've had. And I'm going to be starting backwards and kind of, starting at the end and kind of working backwards here. So The conclusion I came from looking at all my training and race data is that I lacked race-specific endurance. And this is kind of evident during the race. I was running really fast from the start of the race, from 5K to half marathon. I actually set PRs in all those distance. I ran my fastest 5K, my fastest 10K, my fastest 10 mile, and my fastest half marathon during the start of the race. Um, I'd been improving a lot, but I had never run quite like this before, and I definitely felt it as the race went on. So we can already see there's kind of a disconnect between kind of the my expectations and the result I had. Why did I believe I could run so fast from in a marathon and set all these PRs? I did kind of plan to set a PR from all these distances in the marathon. Why did I believe I could do that? And the big answer is that my training was going extremely well at altitude. I live here and I train here in Boulder, Colorado, which is roughly a mile above sea level. And all my training indicators, all the improvements I was making, my key workouts from this training cycle versus my previous training cycles, it all increased by pretty substantial margins. And they were all in line with, well, if I could race at those speeds and those power targets in previous races, and I was doing these types of workouts, I made this amount of improvement during these training sessions, I definitely thought my marathon time would improve by the same margin. But the one thing I didn't take into account was the race specific endurance. And there's three data points I noticed when I started analyzing my training data and my racing data that really all indicated that I had this larger problem of lacking race specific endurance. So the first one here is I'm going to be diving into three data points that talk about misevaluating fatigue patterns in my peak marathon workouts, um, a gap in training where I did not train enough continuously at kind of that higher marathon pace at elevation. And then the third point was not adjusting for humidity on race day here. So point number one, misevaluating fatigue patterns. So I grabbed one of my key workouts, one of my key peak workouts here that I did at altitude on the treadmill, where I was running slower than race pace, but I was running to kind of an equal marathon intensity that I would run at sea level here. So at altitude, I was running at 410 watts, but that would convert to roughly 430 watts when I go down to sea level. But I was running slower at kind of that 610 minute per mile pace, where I was trying to run under 6 minutes per mile pace at sea level there. So you can kind of see this interplay of um, being aerobically fit and having kind of the metabolic capabilities to run at the intensity at sea level, but lacking kind of that mechanical um, fatigue resistance at at sea level. But I was able to, basically show I could run those power intensities at altitude, but I couldn't run those speeds at sea level here. And one thing I kind of missed when I was analyzing my data leading up to the race is that I definitely had major fatigue patterns, even running at 6 minute and 10-second per mile pace here. You can see that green line here, which I've drawn an arrow underneath. You can see I had a pretty steep drop off in leg spring stiffness, even running 10 miles at 6 minute and 10-second per mile pace. And the fatigue was becoming so severe, I actually stopped briefly to kind of collect myself before I finished the last few miles of this workout. And I kind of misevaluated things because at the time I thought if I had a good taper, that would mean I would be ready to go for race day. Kind of my mechanical fatigue resistance would kind of jump up ahead of race day. And I felt like I was really just fatigued because of the training. And that was definitely a mistake. This is kind of a sign of things to come rather than something I could overcome as part of kind of a taper and kind of that increasing fitness during that stage. So that was the first thing I overlooked, in that I did not have the fatigue resistance mechanically to run those higher intensities at sea level. And why was this? Why did I lack that mechanical fatigue resistance? And that brings me to point two here, mistake number two, in that I did not train enough continuously at marathon pace at elevation. And this is something I kind of recognized afterwards, in that I actually kind of recognized during the race as I was approaching mile 17, mile 18 during the race, I kind of recognized that I was getting really, really tired, and I questioned why was I getting so tired. And now that I go back and analyze my training data, I can see I never really ran at that marathon pace for prolonged periods of time. Actually, the longest I kind of run at that pace at elevation was during a 10K race I did, which only lasted, of course, you know, a little over 6 miles. And even in training, I never really ran continuously for those longer kind of intensities, which meant I did not build up fatigue resistance running at race intensity. So that kind of brings me to mistake number two in that I thought my strength, I'm very strong. I can do a lot of strength exercises very easily. I am, very big, have large legs, very used to running at kind of, long periods of time and, doing very intense, um, muscular work. I kind of thought my strength would be enough to support that faster running at sea level, but it was insufficient. I did not do enough race pace training at elevation. And the third point, and this point might have actually have saved me on race day if I had adjusted for humidity. I had done lots of heat training at elevation, but I, of course, did not simulate the humidity conditions. And the humidity was definitely higher than it was in previous years, which I just did not make an adjustment for on race day morning. And you can see here kind of the last 15-year average for both the humidity and the temperature was lower in terms of for both those values. And you can see that I grabbed this from a website that kind of gave a PR score based on the weather conditions. You can definitely see the PR score on the most recent conditions was lower as a result of those higher humidity and temperature conditions. So if I looked at the weather conditions at the start on the morning of the race and I had adjusted my power, I probably would have adjusted from around 430 watts down to 420 watts, which would have meant I would have been running slightly slower, which also meant that maybe I would have been okay and that I would have been running slower mechanically. And it's possible I could have maintained a slightly slower pace. And I definitely wouldn't have had to also overcome the additional challenges of the humidity. And I had been monitoring the race conditions every day leading up to the race, but they were changing so much. I kind of became disillusioned and stopped checking the morning of the race. Um, and and I'd stopped checking, which led to not being ready for the humidity conditions. So that kind of summarizes mistake number three. I did plenty of heat training, but was not ready for the humidity, which oddly enough might have saved me if I adjust the power target slightly down. So I do have more marathons on the schedule, and I'm going to be applying these learnings ahead of my next race, which will be at my next marathon race, which will be in December. And of course, targeting Boston in April 2026. So my three big takeaways from analyzing my Stryd data and having these answers available to me is to include more faster and continuous running when training at altitude, at marathon pace. The second thing is including kind of that shorter sea level race prior to my next marathon race, which allowed me to kind of run faster at marathon pace, which is something also I did not do in training. And finally, being more mindful of the weather conditions and other external factors, whether that is heat, humidity, or, for example, other factors such as wind, which Stryd does account for, that'll kind of allow me to better set the expectations in terms of the power target and the resulting time goal. So those are my big learnings. If you have any questions, ask them in the chat. I hope that this thought press kind of helps you orient whether you have a successful race result, learning what went well, being able to look back at training and recognize these are the key things that I did that went really well, or if you had a race result where things did not go so well. Being able to look at your training in this kind of light and taking this thought process through things, helping you identifying things you can improve in the future. We do have one comment from Coach Steve Palladino that says if one trains on a treadmill, one is not fully preparing for mechanical fatigue when racing outside. And that's a great point. That is something else, another note to add to kind of maybe a fourth mistake, and that I do a lot of treadmill training. Um, and it, you know, it worked well for me in previous blocks, but as I keep improving my fitness and that mechanical fatigue keeps kind of, the demands for the mechanical side kind of keep increasing and the speeds kind of keep increasing, it definitely becomes a kind of a gap there. So that is another kind of fourth resolution I didn't mention here, but something I definitely need to undertake as well. And that including more kind of workouts outside, not just on the treadmill, will allow me to better, prepare for the conditions I'll expect to see on race day. So that is a great point in there and something to add in. And as a fourth point from Coach Steve Palladino there, and always kind of prepare doing your race specific workouts and the conditions you expect to see on race day, whether that's surface conditions or inclines, declines, that can be incredibly useful as well. One comment from Ken and Diane Hood. We're proud of you and your efforts to pursue excellence, good info, and great evaluation. You'll get it next time. And I really appreciate that because that is the attitude I've taken, and I appreciate a lot of people supporting me in that way. And that, that's the beauty of once again having the Stryd data, being able to understand things and understand that improvements are being made. For example, even if you fall short of your goals, you can find improvements in anything, whether that's the ability to, you know, um, run faster during certain section of the race, running faster uphill, downhill. There's always improvements you can take and understand. Well, I am getting better in these areas, even if I didn't achieve my ultimate goal. And it's always things you can build on. So I think this comment kind of embodies the right mindset in approaching race goals, especially if you fall short in your pursuit of them. So those are the comments and questions we have for today. I hope that everyone learned something from today's presentation and can apply them to your next race. I look forward to keeping you all updated on further progress and further learnings from Stryd, and hoping this empowers your own training and your own pursuit of your running goals. So that's all I have for today. Thanks everyone for joining me, and I'll see you next time.